Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to have you here at my next podcast. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio management. This podcast is brought to you by PM Powered, a consulting company in project, program, and portfolio management that help you meet your needs in those areas. Today we're going to talk about 5 different articles on different projects in different areas. So it'll be interesting to look at these because they're very vast projects and very different projects, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about them because they do have project managers, but in a different sense than what we might think about project managers. So the first one is called Paralyzed Patients Can Now Control Android Tablets with Their Minds. And they talk about 3 patients that are paralyzed for different reasons. 2 have ALS, and one was just paralyzed. It was was paralyzed from the neck down. So they had no ability to really, especially the 2 with ALS, because they had no speech functions, were not able to communicate anymore. So they talk about one of the ALS patients, and she was a talented musician, and she loved to wear red lipstick, and they call her T6. They don't reveal their names or who their identities are. And she had ALS, and she's paralyzed and hooked to a ventilator. What they did was in 2012, they inserted 96-channel microelectrode array implanted into the motor regions of her brain. And believe it or not, with that, she was able to go onto Google, go onto Amazon, do searches, and she didn't have to type on a QWERTY keyboard or a non-QWERTY keyboard. She did everything with her thoughts, which was different than what they had done. So what they did was for each of these 3 patients, they asked them how they wanted to act like it was a mouse input. So I think with T6, she decided she wanted it to be her right hand was making a fist. So that's how a click on the keyboard. Another patient wanted to flex his left arm. And a third patient wanted to make a fist of their left hand. So through this, they were able to now talk, not talk in the sense, but they were able to send text messages. They were able to send emails. They were able to communicate with each other. They were able to communicate with the researchers. They were able to order on Amazon. They were able to do research. They could stream music. So to me, this is just fascinating. And if you're a project manager on this, I would love to hear from you. You can contact me on wanda@pmpower.com. But to me, this is fascinating of what we're doing in the areas of medicine these days. So let's take a little switch and talk, since we're talking about technology, let's talk about managing the unintended consequences of technology. So this was somebody attended a conference called Unintended Consequences of Technology, or UCOT, and it was in San Francisco. And it wasn't to discuss the terrible aspects of technology and naysayers of technologies, but it was more to talk about what happens when technology goes awry. And the attendees were a collection of entrepreneurs, business executives, journalists, policy thinkers, human rights activists, artists, entertainers, students, and academics. So you can imagine the eclectic area that they had. And none of them were anti-technology. They were rather there because they were pro-technology. One of the speakers, John Powell, director of the Haas Institute for Fair and Inclusive Society at Cal Berkeley, put it, "Technology will not save us." And he's so right. Technology will not save us. We as people need to use the technology correctly if we're going to use it ethically and to help us in the future. So that was the key theme for the day, was that technology will not save them. So ultimately, the article goes on to say that it was stressed by many presenters that humanity is living through a dangerous and precarious moment. As was pointed out many times, all of the technologies discussed, there was AI, data science, social media, etc., have the potential to provide great benefit, but they are also without their risk to society. And we've seen that a lot with AI and ethics, talking about whose ethics do we use. If you go with ethics from an Eastern country, they value the elderly more than they do the youth. So if a car had the choice between running over a child or a baby or elderly in the Eastern society, it would save the elderly, but in our Western society, it would save the child. So here are 6 things that they thought would help with making technology more open and better for the society. So the number 1 thing was hiring more diverse workforce, especially in the field of technology. And there's no more excuses of not hiring minorities and women, because there are enough minorities and women to help with developing technology. De-bias your data sets. The article says there was a focus on the issue of biased and discriminatory data sets, which yield biased and discriminatory algorithms. So by hiring more women and more minorities into this, you can de-bias your data set. And it was biased more towards whites and men. The machine learning algorithms with this data were biased against, believe it or not, minorities, and especially women and minorities. So number 3 was consider dropping the 4-year degree requirement and use competency-based hiring frameworks instead. I couldn't agree with this more. Today, kids and teenagers and young adults understand technology more so than anybody else, and they teach themselves technologies, and they learn this technology in high school, and they can go to trade schools to learn more about the technology. So instead of hiring people with 4-year degrees, hire more people that have trade school and show the competency that they have, and they can bring a lot to the table. Make education and workforce retraining as addictive as Facebook. Jobs are going to be changing more so than ever because of technology. He said, and he shared that in 12 years, some estimates expect that upward of 38% of today's existing jobs could be lost to automation. But also in that same breath, it could be said that more jobs will be added, but they'll be different. So we have to, the companies need to be able to retrain their people and make it addictive to send people to training so that they can learn new things. I used to say this all the time: you don't train us. Training is a secondary and now needs to be more in the forefront. Number 5, become better, more responsible, and media literate sharers of information online. It goes on to say, one of these people, that if you make a mistake and you share something that is not a true story, but was, what do they call it, fake news, that you admit that you made your mistake. And one fellow said that he actually put something out. It was after a hurricane and there was a shark in the middle of the road. Well, it turns out it was fake news, and he went out and said, sorry, it was fake news. I shouldn't have shared it. Then companies should develop a product impact advisory board. I couldn't agree with that more. So whenever the companies make a mistake in a product or sharing information or doing whatever, it should be brought up to an advisory board on how they should change this, and what should be done and how it should be responded to. Too many times companies do wrong things and they just kind of ignore it without saying anything about it, and I think that is the wrong thing to do. And this conference also agreed with it. Okay, let's take a step over to something called the Spinnaker supercomputer, modeled after the human brain, is up and running. I had a very hard time understanding this, but I thought it was kind of interesting that I should bring it out. This was a European study. It's over 10 years, I believe, and it's funded by Europe. But it was trying to create a supercomputer that mimics the brain rather than does dispersed computing. So it was the idea of splitting computation into very small chunks and spreading them over many processors. And that is something that's already been done in leading approach to supercomputers. But even the most parallel systems require a lot of communications and messaging. So what the Spinnaker machine attempts to do is to replicate this, the way that the brain works, which is passes between neurons with information encoded primarily in the timing or rate of those spikes. So the neurons communicate in spikes of information, not in distributed communication. So the Spinnaker machine attempts to replicate this spiking, and it calls it address event representation. So each of the million cores can simulate roughly 1 million synapses in the brain. So depending on the model, 1,000 neurons with 1,000 connections or 100 neurons with 10,000 connections. So information is encoded in the timing of the spikes and the identity of the neuron sending them. When a neuron is activated, it broadcasts a tiny packet of data that contains its address and the spike timing implicitly conveyed. So it's a different way of thinking about it, and it kind of brought in here that if we're doing this differently, then AI probably was going to be different. So this is probably the next step, what we'll see in 10 to 15 years on how computers will work. Or maybe it'll go by the wayside, but I thought it was very interesting because it actually communicates information faster and does it more like the brain. So if we can figure out how to create computers that roughly mimic the brain, then AI might be differently, and we might be able to do ethics depending on how the person would do it instead of having to encode it in there. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. I always like to think about how the next step of technology, and I think this is the next step. The article goes on forever about how the different things, but for us, I think I've covered it in enough detail to show that computers are trying to think in different ways, or machine learning, I should say. So now this is the next step of how a computer will run. So let's look at a different one. This is more of a this was more of an interview with a VP from GE, and it was talking about how it's titled GE, Success of AI Systems Tied to Engineering, Not Algorithms. I found this a little bit interesting, although I thought it was a little bit up in the clouds too. It didn't bring it down to our level of thinking, but I thought we needed to hear about it a little bit from GE's perspective. And this is from GE's Jeff Earhart. He's the Vice President of Intelligence Systems. And he says, like other types of enterprise software, AI systems have to be secure, robust, and scalable, especially in the industrial space, where inaccurate recommendations could have catastrophic consequences. And the article goes on to say, for that reason, AI and machine learning aren't thought of as traditional data science endeavors at GE, as Earhart explains here. So this is, as I said, an interview with Earhart, and it's been a little bit redacted, so let's talk about it in a little bit. So GE is known for building physical objects like wind turbines and jet engines. Your job is to make those physical objects smart. How hard is it to integrate AI and machine learning into pre-existing systems? So Jeff Earhart says there's a lot of hype, excuse me, and a lot of buzz around AI and machine learning. And he says, and much like big data from 5 years ago, people are going to start entering the trough of disillusionment, to steal Gartner's term, because getting this stuff right is incredibly hard. And we've seen it with AI. The AI has had its ups and downs, and there's a lot of things going on with AI that we can't even think about in the future. So even though, he goes on to say, even though places like Amazon or some of the tool vendors are trying to make the underlying algorithms easier to use, that's actually not the hard part. He says that AI systems or machine learning systems are really hard for 3 reasons. First, they're hard to structure, and by structure I mean, how do you understand what you're trying to optimize for? How do you understand bias in the data? And how do you understand that world may be changing? That is not trivial to get right. Second, the systems are hard to implement. That's the old cliche that it's data science, data prep, and data cleaning is 80% of the work. That's still true, especially in this space. And third, he said machine learning systems are hard to maintain. And he goes on to talk about all these different areas, but one thing that caught my eye was he said that machine learning is hard to maintain. And it's not like what they used to do where you would wrap up the software onto a disk and send it out to the customer and then you just forgot about it. He said this is more designing enterprise systems that's constantly changing because the machine is learning. And if there's an oops in the machine learning, it's very difficult to go in and fix it because there has been so much change due to the machine learning. So that's interesting from that perspective, and that's what I really wanted to bring out, that we're kind of going back to enterprise architecture and how do we fix these machines once they've done a lot of learning. So that was very interesting to me, and project managers will have a lot on their plate, and so will technologists that are fixing these areas because they have to go in and see how the machine has changed and figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. So let's go to this last article. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it talks for a bright future of work, focus on purpose. And they're talking about how machines are going to displace a lot of workers, but a lot of workers will be needed because they will have to be looking at these machines and deciding on aha moments. And they talk about a couple of different things. So they talk about on the Toyota line, there's either a buzzard or a cord that they can pull if they see that something's going wrong with the line. And that makes it very interesting for that because it actually will stop the line and somebody from management will come over and talk to the person and figure out what was going wrong and how can they fix it. And this, when you think about it, when you stop a line, that costs a lot of money, but they have found that when workers are brought into it and can have the ability to stop the line because something's going wrong, they have a more invested they're more invested in making sure that the product is good. Another interesting thing that they talked about was a seasonal worker that was just brought in to take care of a machine that took the peeling off of tomatoes. And like I said, he was only seasonal. He was brought in only when they were doing tomatoes, but he looked at the machine and he said, your machine is very inefficient and we can figure out how to make it better. So they gave him the resources and the time to do that. And he actually made the machine 25% better in doing and peeling of the tomatoes. So can you imagine how much money that brought into the company by making the machine 25% more efficient? It decreased the cost of doing it. So that's what they're saying, that we need to stop having our employees go to work on things that they have found that have broken and everybody put in there and just kind of put a Band-Aid on it. We need to get to the root cause of what is inefficient, and we should allow employees to do their jobs, but when they see something that's inefficient, also allow them to do what it needs to be done to fix it, not put a Band-Aid on it, but fix it. They said the millennial generation is very good at this because they are able to, they understand technology and they're not shy about saying that this needs to be done. On a different note, in Germany, the workers are getting older. So what they have done is they have put on the screens of workers that are working on the line or other things, they have made the font bigger. They have put flooring that is more that is softer for people to walk on, and they have put better chairs on the lines and better chairs in offices so that people are better accommodated. So companies need to reshift and focus on their employees and how they can do better for their employees so that they can focus on what they're doing and be able to listen to those employees when they have something to say. I hope you have found these articles to be very interesting. I know that I have from a project management perspective, because we need to bring in project managers to help employees better business re-engineer their organizations and let senior management better engineer their organizations to do that. We need to have project managers in healthcare. to do these very interesting R&D programs and projects. To me, they're just fascinating. So this has been brought to you by PM Powered, your consulting company on project, program, and portfolio needs. I'm Wanda Curley, your authority on project, program, and portfolio needs. If there's something you would like to talk about, or if you are a project manager on any of these, please contact me at wanda@pmpowered.com. Also, please follow me by going to PM Current and follow me on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I'd love to have you following me and bringing me ideas that I'd love to hear about. Have a wonderful and blessed week. I'm Wanda Curley and look forward to seeing you next Monday.